Welcome to Backyard OASIS, a podcast designed by and for older adults living in the beautiful Pioneer Valley of Western Massachusetts and produced in the tech studios at Greenfield Community College in Greenfield, Massachusetts. Backyard OASIS reaches out to older adults who seek knowledge to help them live more thoughtfully, healthily, and happily, who hope to inspire others with their ideas, and who serve their communities in the interest of the greater good. We hope you join us frequently in our pleasant Backyard OASIS for wide-ranging conversations with a diversity of people who are growing older and want to talk about it.
Hi, I'm Denise Schwartz, your host. You know, my friend Barbara came over the other day, and we sat in our living room talking about what my friends and I always seem to talk about these days. No, not medical procedures. No. We talked about our futures. You know, now that we can accept that there is a finite amount of time left for us to be here on Earth, we want to think about things differently. Like, how do we want to spend this time? Do we want to live in our homes? Do we want to hire someone to care for us when we cannot do everyday things on our own? Move into a community for older adults? And if so, do we want to wait or do it now? So for about 2 hours we talked, and our conversations, they were not all gloom and doom. We did talk about the trips we've planned, the jobs our husbands are doing around the house, the upcoming wedding of a good friend's daughter, what our sons were doing these days, how much we love zinnias and can't wait to plant them again this summer. And when the time came for Barb to head home, well, we hugged each other like we usually do, and we said how much our long chat meant to us. And then we realized that when we think about growing older and what we're going to do about it, what we have to do is to keep talking about it, talking together, all of us. My guest today feels that it's time to have a frank conversation about what kinds of communities we want to live in as we age. What's most important? What do we want from each other? He says that many of us are in an aging community situated in aging global societies that have no parallel in human history. And if we want to continue to age healthily and more happily in age-friendly communities, then doing so, well, it's up to us. So my guest today is Jason Molony. He's the Age and Dementia-Friendly Program Director at LifePath here in Greenfield, Massachusetts. It's a nonprofit organization serving older people, people with disabilities, and caregivers in Western and Central Mass. He leads efforts to build more inclusive, supportive communities for older adults, caregivers, and people living with dementia. For the last 13 years, he's focused on systems-level change and community-based solutions to improve aging in the healthcare, academic research, and nonprofit sectors. Previously, he directed the SHARE network at the University of Chicago, and he led the Massachusetts AI and Technology Center for Connected Care and Aging at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. And with that, I'm going to say hi, Jason.
Hi, Denise. It's great to be here.
It's good to have you here and talk about our futures as aging people. Mm-hmm. So why don't we start with that? I was really interested in how you said that we need a wake-up call because we are in uncharted territory historically, globally, and locally when it comes to aging.
Yep.
What are we going to do about this?
Great questions and a way to set off a big conversation.
Yeah.
It is absolutely true that we are in a completely historically unprecedented world when it comes to aging demographics. And when I say historically unprecedented, I don't mean just, the 20th century, but throughout the entire span of humankind. There has never been a point at which there are as many older adults, certainly by proportion to the overall population, as there are right now, and as there will be as this change continues to accelerate rapidly.
You know, we talk about, we live in Franklin County in Massachusetts, and we talk about having one of the oldest populations of, one of the largest populations of older adults in the Commonwealth. But I think you told me that this isn't just a Western Massachusetts thing. This really is everywhere
Right.
in other countries.
Right. You'll see the divide happen often between rural and urban communities. Urban communities tend to concentrate more younger people,
Sure.
so that's true. Franklin County, to put it in context, is about on par with the state of Florida, with about between 25 and 30% of people over the age of 65.
Wow.
Yeah. And as I said, that's going to continue to grow. And we need to reposition our thinking and our communities around that reality. Okay.
Well, before we start talking about age-friendly communities, let's talk about ageism.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Important topic. And you mentioned, you kind of briefly went over the course of my career. And so I've been focusing on these aging issues for quite some time now. And it's interesting how ageism went from what is that word? I hadn't heard that before, to, oh, this is a priority I should be thinking about, or we who work in the field should be thinking about in the context of a lot of other things, to this is really one of the core issues that's driving a lot of the inequities that are present in how we regard older adults. Ageism is pervasive. It's, if you start looking for it, you will see it all over the place. And it's the... it's the attitude that older adults don't hold the same value as younger folks. It's stigma that I think is very much tied to how people think about their own aging course,
Right.
and perhaps their fear of the possibility that their life may come to an end at some point.
Well, you know something, it does.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's where the frank conversation that we comes in. We have to really be honest with ourselves about this.
Mm-hmm.
It is going to come to an end. So how do we want to live that way? But still about ageism, I've encountered a lot of people who are, I don't even know the word to describe it. I'll say something about their phone or their laptop, and they'll say, "Oh, well, I'm just like a dinosaur. I don't know anything about that." And I feel like, well, you're perpetuating this idea of older people not being adept.
Mm-hmm. It's a myth. There's no scientific basis that says you're less able to learn new things.
Right.
When you hit some number. That's not true. Right. And so is the whole notion that, in that example, that older folks are not able to embrace technology and leverage it. That is a story that we tell to ourselves,
Yeah.
and perhaps end up manifesting it for the wrong reasons.
I just saw an article in a printed magazine that I was reading, and it was about Ringo Starr. And, it was called Ringo Starr, We Still Need Him at 84 or something like that, because, the song, when I'm 64.
Yeah.
And it was talking about he's still vibrant, he's still out there, he's still doing things, he's 84. There are a lot of stories about people who were creative geniuses and they did their best work when they hit their 70s. Yeah. So how do we turn this around? What are some of the things that we can do to kind of reframe aging?
Well, I think that number one, we can be very careful about language. Look for places in which we are, and you'll see this change happen. For example, the state-level organization, the Executive Office of Elder Affairs, recently changed their name to be the Executive Office of Aging and Independence. So there's, at a policy level, and I think for all of us, being conscious of language and the message it sends is very important. I think that we can start asking questions, as a way to be engaged in rethinking about how our communities can be, and I'll start using the term age-friendly.
Sure.
And if you see ageism, if you start to look for it, if you see, for example, I'm not going to call it any names, but I was in a store that sells makeup the other day, and I saw a big poster that said, basically, rid yourself of aging, or something to that effect.
Yeah, right.
And so I said to the person, I think that's ageist,
Good for you.
Yeah.
And what was the response?
A look of a little bit of confusion and a promise to go talk to a manager, but that sign was not there when I went back.
Is that true?
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
That was a really good thing to do.
Yeah, and I'm still getting used to it. And so I think number one is that we need to understand the impact of ageism. Why is 2% of philanthropic giving, or given towards causes that support older adults? Why are less than 75 out of the 18,000 new doctors that are produced by our medical training system every year specializing in treating older adults?
That's a really good question, because it implies that we, the medical professions, don't believe that older adults have that much worth because they don't have that much time left. And yet they all have parents and grandparents whom they probably value very deeply. And you would think that that would provide them with an idea of the worth and the value of older adults, and therefore want to treat them and want to see them as patients.
And the majority of their patients.
Wow.
Right. And so, that requires specialized training.
Right.
Older adults, and we could go on a whole tangent about the medical system, and there's age-friendly health systems initiatives that are happening under the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, and you'll start hearing more about that, I hope, in time. But the question is, why would we not have doctors that have extensive training in geriatrics, which people are medically complex,
Right.
And they may be on 12 different medications, so that it does not lend itself to the kind of what they might call algorithmic care that you will see become more prevalent. It requires special training. So anyway, but that's just one age-friendly.
I have to apologize to our
Please.
listeners, because I know you and we tend to talk over each other, and so we're just going to put that out there. We're sorry when we do that. We're really trying hard as older adults to learn not to talk over each other, and now I'm going to be quiet to prove that I can learn to do this too. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah. So we were talking about ageism, and I think that it's incumbent on all of us to acknowledge that as another ism, and to ask each other to think about why these attitudes come from, and who do they do a disservice to all of us, really. Unlike other isms, if you will, ageism is something we will all we
Right.
hope to be fortunate enough to
Fall into the category of.
Right.
Yes,
And
that's
so,
right.
I thought about saying this at some point, but if you care about, you don't have to be an altruist to care about age-friendly communities or ageism or things like that, because you're going to experience the world that you participate in thinking about aging-related issues at some point.
Well, that's a really good segue into talking about age-friendly communities. Can you describe what that is? And then, of course, we have to talk about how to create age-friendly communities.
So the idea of an age-friendly community came at the highest global level within the World Health Organization, and it was an acknowledgement that our countries globally are shifting to be older demographically speaking. Certain countries are outliers and got their kind of first, like Japan, Italy. This, if not addressed, it will have major, particularly economic consequences. In China, they're learning this already, as you've got a larger group of people who might require support, and a smaller group of people who are economically active and able to generate the revenue required to do that. So anyway, the World Health Organization first developed this age-friendly framework, which looks at society and divides it into sectors, and I'm not going to get too technical here. So they developed this, and it first rolled out as age-friendly cities back in about 2008, somewhere in there. Don't quote me on that. And then AARP took that framework and adapted it for a nationwide rollout here in the United States. And AARP is a huge advocate of what they call livable communities, which are based on the age-friendly framework.
So what does it look like?
What does it look like? So it's what it would look like and what it would feel like. So an age-friendly, let's talk about an experience in a, not a utopian, but a practical age-friendly community. It might be one where you go to the pizza shop, and if you forget why you were there, somebody will be able to communicate with you in a compassionate way. Or the menu is large enough that you can read.
Good idea.
Yeah, you might go back to your home that has been adaptively modified such that you can stay in it safely for longer. Your grandkids at school might be learning about how the changes to their body will happen as they age, or have access to intergenerational programming. Importantly, your leaders would be cognizant of the policy changes they might need to make, and are thinking about whether these policies or measures are adaptable, affordable, accessible by older adults, and so on.
Okay.
It's a problem.
I think what we talked about was that if we want to live in age-friendly communities, it's up to us to make them age-friendly. But seriously, here I am. What do? I can talk to people because I care about language. And so I tell people, AARP says, we should not use the term elderly anymore. We want to use older adult. A language issue, it's very important. But what can I do to make where I live in Deerfield, Massachusetts, an age-friendly community? What steps can I take?
Yep. So I would argue that we are talking about a degree of activism. There are certainly changes you could make in your own personal everyday life, but I would sort of encourage you to think beyond that in participating in civic conversation around really could be any issue, but thinking about what's the impact of that going to be on older adults, perhaps voting for representatives who think that way. It could be so. And we're talking here about one who's living here in Franklin County. I would advocate for, getting yourself educated about the regional age and dementia-friendly work that we're doing based in LifePath, but encompassing lots of partner organizations, and find a way to get involved. Review the regional action plan that's available on the LifePath website, for example. And if you read about what we call an action step that might be appropriate, and you say, hey, why doesn't my community have hearing devices that allow everyone at the town hall to be able to participate? Ask the question.
Is it that easy to do, though, just to walk into your town and ask that question?
Yes and no. So each town will have a council on aging. That would be the appropriate way, I would say, to get involved in that way, and start asking those questions and find out what work is being done and join.
We're not just talking about age-friendly communities, but also about dementia-friendly communities. So let's talk a little bit about dementia. We're hearing so much now about how many people have dementia. Can you tell us a little bit about why that's happening? And then what do we do to make it easier for people with dementia to live happily and more healthily in our communities?
Sure. So you're right. As there are more and more older folks by percentage, we're having more and more people with dementia. It's about, I believe in Franklin County, like 9.5% of people over 65 reported dementia. And that number is surely an undercount. The reasons for it are the increased prevalence of dementia are varied. And by the way, dementia, of course, is an umbrella term that includes Alzheimer's, frontotemporal vascular, Lewy bodies, all these kinds of dementias. But they are on the rise, and I think that's a public health concern that's growing considerably. We are also in a situation in which pharmaceutical options for the treatment of dementia have historically been limited. There's some progress there, but that puts the onus on us even more so to look at, as individuals, what behavioral changes can we make to help reduce the environmental risk of dementia, but also to encourage communities to embrace these folks who are living with significant cognitive impairment.
What do you mean by embrace?
Great question. So I think that being knowledgeable about what dementia is and what simple steps, and this is a lot of what we do as part of this age and dementia friendly. We offer trainings. We can point people in directions.
Oh, I do have a question, and I didn't mean to talk over you, but we have trainings, but really, what are they? I mean, okay, I'm encountering a friend who has been diagnosed as having dementia. How do I talk to that person? How do I make myself comfortable around that person? What do I do?
So I think that understanding some basic communication skills are really important, that it's sort of important you don't have to dispute what they might be asking again, or sort of check your frustration and be able to kind of respond back to that person and acknowledging that they're not going to be able to remember the fact that, they've been told the same thing any number of times. I think that it's important to know that setting matters a lot.
What do you mean?
A loud, chaotic, or unfamiliar setting can be quite distressing for somebody with dementia. And so it's important to bear that in mind while you're talking with them. and see, keep a calm demeanor yourself if need be, and just be patient, be willing to listen.
But it's pretty hard to not be emotional when you're encountering somebody that you care about who has dementia and who continually asks you the same question. Or, it's just really hard to not be emotional about
Right.
it. What should we do?
Well, perhaps another way we could think about that is caregiver burnout, right? I think that it's supporting caregivers and being able to share resources might be the best way you could help this family that we're sort of envisioning here. And that would kind of be my first kind of go-to in both, thinking about how you can temper your own expectations in communication, but also how you can support the networks that are around this person.
Yeah, I think that's really important because I do have friends who have to deal with this, and I can see that they're not really certain what to say, what to do on an everyday basis. So when you talk about trainings, is that something that someone would learn in a training session?
Sure. Yep. Alzheimer's Association has any number of trainings. We've got some coming up. Speaking of how people could get involved, signing up for the Age and Dementia-Friendly newsletter so you can learn about these trainings. If a listener happens to be affiliated with the Council on Aging or with the town, know that through this Age and Dementia-Friendly work, these trainings are available to you at no cost.
Okay, good to know. I have a question, Jason. Why do you care about this topic?
So early on, I made a career change, and I went back to social work school, and I went to social work school, and I got there. I was like, this is great. I'm going to be in the helping professions. Oh my God, what am I actually going to do? And so I started looking into the possibilities, and I found that there was very little attention being put on working with older adults. And I basically took that thread and ran with it. Your question was why this...
Why do you care about
Why do I care about this? Because that's a great question when you really get down to why. I think that there is just such a huge need. Part of the reason I think I care a lot about it is because not enough people do. Right? And as I said, we're in this situation where it's incumbent on all of us to be thinking about this. And when you work in the field of aging, I think too often you feel like you're over there a little bit in the corner, waving for attention and being like, why are we not, training more social workers to deal with older adult clients? Why are we not, as I mentioned, training more doctors? Or why is this not part of a lot of how we think about how pretty much everyone does their work? And so once I thought more and more about that, I just felt that it became incumbent on me to double down and to put the second or 2/3 or whatever of my career focused on this issue. And so that's been my career North Star, like you read earlier. Wow. I've been working with the older adult population pretty much exclusively across all these settings for quite a while now, and I'll continue to do that.
I was thinking maybe there's not a lot of attention given to this sector, the older adults, because people don't think that it would have a lot of meaning to them to be working in it. But my guess is it really would be. I'm sure that, do you have any stories that you can tell us about folks that you might have worked with?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Can we have one or two?
That's one of the real not secret, but it's funny you mention it because that's one of the real benefits of doing this work is that you get to hang out with older people a lot.
And do you like that?
Of course, yeah. Oh. I can tell you one story. So I've spent quite a bit of time in something called the Village Movement, and I used to work for one. This meant it's a grassroots type model, which I might elaborate on later, but the beauty of that is that a lot of the people you're working with are older adults themselves. And it was when I first I had my first kid, and and I had the opportunity to work with Marilyn, who had 7 kids. And so I would tell her, I'd say, Marilyn, what do you do when they keep crying? And Marilyn, what do you do when they do this? And countless times throughout my career, I've had the opportunity to draw on so much wisdom that's so close at hand when you're working with older people.
Oh my God.
And that's like a benefit they don't tell you about, but I've learned over time.
I think that's really important.
Yeah. If you want to learn about resilience, if you want to learn about I don't know, parenting or change, or you just talk to somebody over the age of 80.
Why do you think that we don't? I mean, we know there have been cultures that really revered their older people, and they did look at them as being the wise people in the group. Why don't we do that anymore? I mean, I know you don't really have the answer, but what is your thinking about that?
Because we're so focused on people as capitalist economic units, right? And there's, in fact, let's say we'll get back to philanthropy. There became this idea of social capital, human capital, really sort of was, I think, reflective, but also perpetuated this idea that, hey, if you spend $1 on early childhood education, for example, nothing wrong with that, but you will get a better return on investment than if you spend that same socially oriented money towards somebody who's older.
Wow.
And
well, that just doesn't seem right.
No, it's certainly a cold calculus, right? Because the reality is, first of all, it doesn't need to be a zero-sum game, although, for all the wrong reasons it is. But we can do both. We can. So, but I think that when you talk about how other cultures, and in China, there's, for example, the notion of filial piety, right? Which, and this is also, even in biblical history, this is foundational. But if you are, again, kind of from a cold capitalist lens, it doesn't make sense, So I think that's part of it.
Tell me another story.
About working with older folks?
Sure.
Oh, gosh. Well, I mean, I've really enjoyed, again, when we partner. One thing I'm always sort of sensitive to is whether this is like some sort of top-down arrangement or, like, for example, during the Village Movement, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of older people living in their community and partnering with them to joke, but also to do all kinds of really important work over time. You were going
to tell me about a guy who continues to go to a memory cafe.
Oh, right. Yeah. So that was a gentleman who is local, and memory cafes. So these are, it's a type of program. It usually takes about an hour and a half. They're hosted at a number of senior centers locally, but it's actually a national thing. And they are designed to give caregivers and people with dementia a place to go to connect, to take a break, perhaps if you're a caregiver of a person living with dementia, to connect. And I almost think of them as sort of sacred spaces. But so there was a gentleman who had been going for quite a while with his, I believe, spouse, and she was living with dementia, and then she eventually, passed away. And he kept going because of the joy and the connection that was in those spaces. And he started going to multiple memory cafes. To anybody who's listening, it's relatively easy to go on and Google a memory cafe near you and find one. So if you're a particular caregiver with somebody living with dementia, they can really be a lifesaver.
As we wind down, I wanted to do two things, and I'm going to talk about one thing first. You brought up something that I had never really thought about. You said that we should talk about independence, and you asked a really compelling question. You asked, does attempting to maintain independence undercut our capacity to thrive? And I never thought of it that way, because we sort of have this idea, especially here in New England, of the older person who lives independently and has a pretty rich and full life and lives to be 100 or so, and that's sort of a model. But you're saying that might not be.
I guess I worry about it as thought of as something that's somehow better than being dependent. There's nothing wrong with being dependent. There's certainly nothing wrong with being interdependent. I think that, and this is my own personal thought, but as human beings, we're not independent. We are not wired to be fully independent. And I think when you look at understanding the momentum around looking at loneliness and social isolation, we need social connection. in largely the same way that we need air to breathe and water to drink. It's just a human thing to need other people, and it's okay. And it's also okay to be independent, but I don't know that we need to hold up independence as a singular mindset across any portion of the lifespan.
Yeah, like you mentioned, it might be a good idea. I mean, it might sound like a good idea to want to be independent, but at some point, are you going to be able to plow your own driveway? Are you going to be able to cook your meals? What happens? Will you not cook meals because you can't? And so you're not getting a lot of nutrition. And so you might become unhealthy. Is that, I think what we talked about a little earlier was like, in that situation, would it be better for that person to accept some help from people?
Right. Yeah. I think possibly yes. And and I think that one should not sort of look at that as a personal failure.
Ah, right. They do look at that as a failure. I couldn't do it on my own. That could be, a lot of people try to, or I think a lot of people think of that as being a New England thing, but that's probably true everywhere. I can do this. In fact, don't we all feel that way most of the time until we can't?
Yeah. And I think that we can also thrive in an independent way, or excuse me, in an interdependent way.
Interdependent, what does that mean?
I think that means that rather than sort of setting up this idea of being dependent on others, and therefore, of it being sort of one directional, I think interdependence sort of says, I depend on you and you depend on me.
Oh.
Collectively.
I like that.
Yeah, and that's okay, and that's also that's more, I think, honestly reflective of reality.
Well, I think we need to kind of come to the end of our conversation now, but I wanted to mention something. There were other things we wanted to talk about, and I'm hoping that we can do a second session, because some of the things I wanted to talk about was judgment-free zones, making connections. This is all in relation to older adults and aging. Having a healthy aging data book, and reimagining 2030. Are those 4 things that you could talk about at another time?
Absolutely.
I think we should plan to do that.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. And then I said there were 2 things I wanted to say, and one we've already talked about, and that was, can we really thrive if we remain independent? And the second thing I wanted to say was, I am really touched to hear you say that you have selected this demographic to be part of your life's work, that you enjoy being with older adults, and that I could see when you were telling the stories, your face changed, you smiled. It was like, oh, I've learned so much from them, and I think it's wonderful that you've done this, especially when you have also said that not a lot of people want to really focus on aging, which is something we're all doing. I'm really glad to know that about you.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Same. Thank you, Denise.
Anything else we want to say for listeners before we say goodbye?
I don't. Give me a second here.
Yeah. We talked about frank conversations. Let's just take 1 minute and talk about that.
Sure.
Maybe we kind of skirt around the issue. What can we do to be more frank, more direct in talking about this thing that we, even sometimes when we say that person died, we hesitate before we say the word died. Aging. What do we need to do to have frank conversations?
Great. I'd say...
Do we do what we're doing now?
Perhaps. And I think that understanding the reluctance to really talk about aging is important. Again, maybe to start learning more about ageism and our own kind of internal biases is important. I think that also, for a lot of people, and this is related to that, just not wanting to acknowledge the normal aging process as occurring within all of us, or viewing aging and infirmity as somehow, inherently intertwined, which they're not.
Right.
Or, getting, sort of expanding the notion of vitality as something that can occur over the entire lifespan and contribution over the entire lifespan. Will sort of liberate us to be able to have these conversations, to just rethink what it even means to age. The other thing that I think is important and worth mentioning is I worry that we sort of do ourselves a bit of a disservice too in talking about, I have mentioned it a few times myself, but over 65. And so you're talking about this potentially 35-year span of time. People, it's not a monolith. We've got multiple generations.
Right.
So,
yes.
We need to talk about whether our institutions are set up, appropriately for this, and how the norms are going to change as we go from the greatest generation to the boomers, to et cetera, et cetera. So
you're really coming up with a lot of things you have to talk about in our next episode.
Agreed.
So write those down, will you?
I will.
Write them down before you forget, okay?
Indeed.
Oh, God. Don't you hate it that you forget things like that? I mean, we are aging, Jason.
Well, I also did give you my pen.
You did. I'll hand you your pen back. Hey, thank you for being here so much. You've given me a lot to think about, and hopefully our listeners are thinking about it too.
Same.
See you later.
You bet. Thank you, Denise. Bye-bye.
This concludes today's podcast. We're always looking for new ideas, so feel free to reach out to Judy Raper, Associate Dean of Community Engagement at Greenfield Community College, at 413-775-1819. If you have an idea you'd love to share. Special thanks to the creators of Backyard OASIS, Denise Schwartz, Chad Fuller, Dennis Lee, and Christine Copeland. Have a great day.